Vulnerability is terrifying, yet it is something most experience, whether that be emotionally or physically. The idea of exposure often stems from feelings of insecurity within ourselves, building a chasm between our self-image and the reality. These deep-rooted emotions may lead to distorted images of those around us, often feeding into stereotypes and creating misjudgments. This was especially unsettling for Binti as she freshly steps into her teenage years, beginning to realize how the others around her perceive the world. Binti is caught in a web of familial loss, obsolete ideologies, and unwavering pride while being subjected to abuse. Her less than predictable life brings her a series of somber events, forcing her to face the bitter realities of the world around her and herself. Author Deborah Elise puts herself in the shoes of an African teen to portray some of the lesser-known issues faced globally, focusing on the narrative of self-reflection and prejudice. Through Binti's journey facing all of these struggles, Deborah Elise describes a coming of age in a setting most are unfamiliar with. And as the readers acquaint themselves with this non-relatable plotline, it becomes apparent one of the morals behind the story. Self-doubts are often reflected on others in the form of prejudice. Something heavily explored throughout the book was the emotional baggage the multiple characters were carrying, giving the readers a deep insight into their personalities. Since this book takes place in a rather unfortunate setting, the intimate backstories and psyches of most of the main characters are described delicately enough to paint a saddening image for the readers. Some of the more internal negative attributes about them, such as their regrets, guilt, and misdemeanors, are the key indicators of the crux of their nature, which becomes crucial in understanding their vulnerabilities and hence prejudicial interactions with others. Each of them bring an aura alongside, setting the mood for the scene. A vivid example of this is in Chapter 4 when Binti and Kwasi looked after Bamboo, and the tone of the scene was rather mellow, since the author focused on foreshadowing a tragedy as well as some minor details around the room, such as Kwasi lighting the kerosene lamp, or Binti sweeping the ground, or the brewing of the tea in the background. Why this stood out was because of the overall lack of imagery throughout the book, so little details like such were very distinct when there. However, the soft moment was soon interjected with Juni's complaining as she began to argue with Binti over their responsibilities, completely turning around the tone for the scene. She insisted that, quote, "You, Binti, spend all your time thinking about that radio show. You think you're so important. When I was 13, I had already been looking after you, Kwasi, and the house for 3 years," end quote. In this, Juni describes clearly the reason behind why she acted the way she had. It was because of her childhood experiences and the remorse she had been carrying because of that she belittled Binti seemingly out of nowhere. Her internal dilemmas took over her better judgment. Juni always had an underlying belief of her contributions being greater than her sister's, creating a toxic relationship between the two, which now she used as an excuse for her behavior towards Binti. This can also be seen with other characters and even Binti herself. Her discriminatory behavior towards Memory was simply unjust. She had thought of Memory as less than, knowing she's HIV positive and a victim of sexual abuse. And even though this isn't to be excused, viewing it from Binti's perspective provides us with clarity because of her entire life. Binti had been fed the idea of STDs, rape, etc. to be seen as blemishes on one's character. This theme of past principles governing one's current actions is reoccurring in the novel, and defines especially the times when there is an unjust act carried out by any of the characters. It's due to their clouded heads that the characters are unable to differentiate their thoughts from reality and are so quick to act on them without filtering the unnecessary or the unkind. While internal conflicts such as contemplating one's worth fog up the reality, the same can be triggered by others' actions. The influence of one's friends, family, and sometimes even passerbys is tremendous when it comes to shaping who they are. We look for others' validation to boost our self-esteem, to make us feel good enough. Not getting that attention reverts the thought process, enhancing self-deprecating emotions. Binti, for most of her life, had gotten her fair share of praise and endearment. With her radio show thriving, a loving father, and peers that respected her, she was one of the luckier ones in Malawi. Her development in some of the former chapters is stagnant, as she is portrayed to be an accomplished and ambitious teen who unsurprisingly thinks very highly of herself. Abruptly, there is a major transition following Bamboo's death. Not only does she lose her father, her radio show, friends, and possessions are also ripped away from her. Moving in with her aunt and uncle, she soon realizes what she's viewed as: a worthless orphan. When Uncle Wizen remarks, quote, "You are orphans with no status. Be thankful for what you have," end quote, even while treating Binti and Junie as his servants. Binti is soon reduced to nothing but a maid for her relatives, bearing their constant scorn and criticism. Her pride starts to shatter when her aunt takes away the magazine with her article about it, and one by one, every prized possession of hers isn't hers anymore. Amidst this, she loses direct support from her sister, now having to fend for herself. She is pushed so deep into a hole of shame and grudges that she starts to embody them, later echoing them on Memory. Only after Binti and Memory's first interaction, she develops a distaste for the girl, which enhances after she discovers of Memory's unfortunate past. Memory, though, doesn't retaliate for a long time. After repeated misbehavior, Memory has to step in, lecturing Binti, quoting, "You act like you've been stuck here by an accident and you're waiting for someone to fish you out. Like you're special," end quote. Binti's attitude towards Memory can be a parallel comparison to that of her aunt to Binti. They both had some preconceived notion that they hold so dearly to themselves, thinking of them as better than, and when those were challenged, they were unsettled. This is similar to how someone victim to bullying is likely to bully others. Prejudice in any form creates a ripple effect and a chain reaction, being passed on indefinitely. Thus, when one falls victim to discrimination, insecurities arise, leading them to continue the initial malice received. Self-awareness is the key to overcome prejudice. It has been established thoroughly enough how insecurities guide one in the wrong direction, tumbling them in a deeper hole. It would now be safe to assume that those aware of their insecurities, holding themselves accountable for their actions, would be more generous, given self-doubts are key to hatred, amongst others. Deborah Ellis depicts this skillfully by including some supporting characters serving as balls of sunshine filled with cautious optimism, one of them being Gogo. Gogo is the safe haven for every child, a supporting presence to have around, bold and high in stature. She's described as what a perfect grandmother would be like, always stepping in to protect her kids, even when they aren't related by blood. She is incredibly strong in what she believes and what she preaches. Her foundation is remarkable, as she's learned much better than judgment and hate. Despite having no room or resources for another member, she happily welcomed Binti, quote, wrapping Binti in her arms, end quote, without hesitation. Her activism throughout the community has gained her a level of respect that astonishes Binti, because truly, how can someone who suffered so much be so great? Yet here was Gogo serving as a refuge to every child in the neighborhood, treating them as her own regardless of their experiences. The entire narrative of insecurities about oneself and others is wrapped nearing the ending in a conversation between the main characters, summarizing for the readers their journeys and its deeper impacts. Binti told her story of being lost in her uncle and aunt's house, prompting Kwasi to tell his of at the Monkey Bay where he was taken advantage of. Next, Jeremiah, who hadn't explicitly opened up about his experience, chimed in as well, saying, quote, "When I was told I was HIV positive, I thought that the disease was all I was. I met other HIV positive people. They said they weren't sick and living positively, which gave me hope," end quote. All of them realized the importance of finding one's true self and holding on to what matters to oneself rather than giving into societal standards. Coinciding with these nuanced ideas were acceptance that they had for Junie despite her also being HIV positive, as well as memory. And the characters had long forgotten any prejudice that they had earlier possessed. This captured the true essence of growth that they had gone through in the roller coaster of a plotline. Understanding themselves and conquering their fears is what led to their betterment and a positive footprint on others. Throughout the story, the character development was very prominent. It tried to rid the readers of a barrier between themselves and the world, urging them to explore and reflect, to learn better. The idea of being able to counter one's own prejudice through self-reflection resonated. The Heaven Shop is truly a coming of age, yet so much more. It so simply depicts the story of someone way beyond the target demographic of the audience, yet somehow managing to incorporate elements of relatability. Through Binti, Memory, Junie, and Kwasi's story, we not only understand the harsh realities of the world, but also find ways to apply those principles learned in our own lives. Binti realized how immature she had been, valuing her pride over everything else, and she took that chance to grow. The entirety of the growth in the book can be summarized in one bittersweet quote. "For you to give away something so precious to you, you're not a child anymore, are you?" end quote, Junie exclaimed as she kissed Binti.